everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Mary Kajoka, and I hope to make your day even more wonderful as we learn how to calculate with different conditions. This is a Business 216 class video, Excel Basics video number 5, and these are the topics that we will cover in this video. As always, if you're working along with me as we learn these new calculations and formulas, please download the M365 Excel Basics video number 5 workbook file that is included below this video. The file is also provided for you in our class canvas. Here are the topics that we will cover in this video. We will learn how to calculate with different criteria, and we will learn how to create a unique list, as well as learn how to add data validation. I have included some notes here about the functions that we are learning in this video. Let's first go through the notes. If you would please open the IFS function worksheet. These notes are provided for you in this class. The if is a logical function, and we use the if function to test one condition or criteria. We use the ifs function with an S to test more than one condition, that is multiple conditions or criteria. The if function, it allows you to make logical comparisons between a value and what you expect. Logical functions are used in spreadsheets to test whether a situation is true or false. Depending on the result of that test, you can decide to do one thing or another. With the if function, you can put one of two items in a cell, but if you want to put more than one item in a cell, in that case, then we have to use the ifs function. When using the IFS Aggregate Function, that is the SUMIFS, the COUNTIFS, and the AVERAGEIFS, we are calculating based on AND logical tests. The AND logical test or the AND function compares the results of more than one condition or criteria, and this ensures that a calculation will not be performed unless all the specified conditions or criteria are met. This means that the first, the second, and the third, and so on conditions all must be true before the AND returns the value true. There are up to 127 criteria or conditions in an AND logical test, although in most cases you will use less than 5 criteria. And in this class, we will use 2 or 3 conditions. When making reports and performing analysis, you'll often need to do some aggregate operations like adding, counting, averaging, or even finding minimum and the maximum values. For most of the time, you do not want to perform the calculation on all the records in the database, but you want to make calculations on records based on the condition or the criteria that you specify. Excel supports these functions: sum, count, average, mean, and max with logical expressions. So we can calculate statistics only on those cells that will meet or match the logical condition or criteria that we specify. Down below here, I have included with our notes the summary of IFS function. To count the number of cells within a range that meets the specified criteria, we use COUNTIFS. To add the sum of values for cells that meet the specified criteria, we use the SUMIFS. To calculate the average values of cells that meet the specified criteria, we use the AVERAGEIFS, and we use the MINIFS to find the smallest number and the MAXIFS to find the largest number. Let's go to our CSAM count, sum, average, mean, max worksheet and see some examples, as well as learn how to count, add, and average using these aggregate functions. As I said, in this video, we are learning how to use the IFS aggregate functions, COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, MINIFS, and MAXIFS to calculate based on AND logical tests. We're going to specify a criteria or condition whereby we are only making the calculations on some of the items and not all the items in our data. We will start by counting. We will count the numbers. We will count all the numbers in our data. So we'll click on cell G14 and we will do our formula for counting right there. We'll also do the count A, where we are counting the cells that are not empty. That means we are counting all the words, and we'll do the sum, which adds all the numbers, and we have done the sum function in this class before. We'll also do the average, whereby we are averaging all the numbers in our data. So let's start by counting. To count, we will use the function, or we'll use the formula equals count. The value is what we are counting. For our case, we are counting the number of cells that we have in this data. So I will select cell E12, and I will use our keyboard shortcut to select this entire field. Control Shift down arrow. All that is selected, and I don't have anything else that I need to count. It's just that values for the cells. So I will close that, and I will Control Enter to remain in the same cell. That means the number of cells that we have in our data here, or the number of cells that were sold here, is 30. That's our count of cells. I will press Tab to select cell H14, and in this cell I would like to count cells that are not empty. So we'll use count A to count the cells that have data. It can be text value or it can be number values. So for our case, we'll count the cells that have data in our data right here. Equals count A. I'm using my down arrow and the tab key to select the function. And I'm selecting column D, cell D12. I will use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift down arrow to select all the values that I need to count. I will close my formula. Control Enter, and I can see I have 30 records in my data. So the count A counts cells that are not empty. And now I can see I'm counting all words, or I'm counting cells that are not empty, and I have a 30 count for my data set here. Now we'd like to add all the numbers, and we will add the total revenue for our data. We have used the sum function before, and I will use the keyboard shortcut for that. Alt equals, and you can see it selects the wrong range, but it's okay as long as I have the dancing ants. I can select the range that I want. So I will click on cell E12, and I can see now I'm able to select the range that I want. So that's the range that I am adding. Sum function to add all the numbers. Control Enter. I've added all the values. I'll tab to go to the next cell where I'm calculating the average for all the numbers, or the average for all my revenue. And I will use the average function equals average. I will tab to select the function, and I will click on cell E12. I can either use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift down arrow, or I can select using my mouse since I don't have a huge data, and Control Enter. I see I have now calculated the average for all the revenue, or for all the sales in my data set right there. So that's our first example where we are counting the numbers, we are counting cells that are not empty, we are adding the numbers, and we are finding the average for our numbers. In our second example, we will use the COUNTIFS and the SUMIFS. We will count with one or more criteria, and we will add with one or more criteria. So right here, I'm in cell H22. That's the selected cell, and that's where I will do my calculation on. Equals COUNTIFS. So the COUNTIF, as I said, it counts the number of cells within a range that meets the given condition. The COUNTIF only counts with one condition. I'm using my down arrow to select the COUNTIFS. The COUNTIFS counts the number of cells specified by a given set of conditions or criteria, as I said earlier. For this class, we will not use COUNTIF because the COUNTIF only calculates with one criteria. We will use the COUNTIFS because the COUNTIFS counts the numbers with one criteria or with more than one criteria. And that's what we will use for our class. Instead of using COUNTIF with one criteria, we will use the COUNTIFS, and that applies to the SUMIFS, the AVERAGEIFS, the MINIFS, and the MAXIFS. We will use the COUNTIFS because we can do our calculations with one or more criteria. And in our example here, we're just doing one criteria, but we will have more examples where we will do 2 or 3 criteria. So I'm tabbing to select that. Our first argument here for our COUNTIFS is the criteria range. The range references the range of the cells to be counted. That means it's more than one cell. It's a range. And the criteria is the value or the condition that defines which cell to include in the count. And this can be found in our notes as well. What is the range and what is the criteria? Our criteria range will be the sales rep, because our criteria, the one that we have defined here, is the sales rep. So we'll select the range for the sales rep, and I don't have to lock that because I am not copying my formula anywhere. So I'll put a comma to separate the argument. My criteria is the value or the condition that defines which cell to include in the count, and that is this one right there. If I had different criteria, or if I had more than one criteria, I would put a comma, and you can see I have criteria range 2, criteria 2, and it can go on and on up to 127 different criteria, as I said before. So I will backspace to delete the comma, and I will close that, Control Enter to remain in the same cell, and I can see I have a count of 7. That means our Mason here, who is our sales rep, they have a count of 7 records from our data set here. That means they made 7 sales from our data set that we have right there. If we would like to add what were the total sales that Mason did, we'll do equals SUMIFS, and again we're using the SUMIFS with the S. Even though we're doing one criteria here, we can do one criteria with the SUMIFS, and we can do more than one criteria also with the SUMIFS. So I will tab to select that. The sum range, that's the range that we are adding for our criteria, which is Mason. Our range that we are adding is the total revenue, and I will select that. Again, I am not locking that because I'm not going to copy my formula. I put a comma. Now our criteria range, that's the range based on our criteria that we have defined. So our criteria range will be the sales rep, since our criteria right here is Mason, who is our sales rep. I will select the sales rep column, as this is our range, and I'll put a comma. Now our criteria will be the criteria that we have defined right there, and we can close our formula, Control Enter. We can see this sales rep made a total sales of $1,209 based on our data that we have right here. So now let's count how many sales were made on this date. Again, we will use the COUNTIFS. So equals COUNTIFS. Our criteria range based on our criteria here is the date. So I will select the entire date column, put a comma, and select the criteria. Control Enter. The sales that were made on this day, there was only a count of 1 sale that were made on this day. So let's see what was the total sale for that day. Equals SUMIFS. We're adding the total sales, that is our sum range. Our criteria range based on the criteria that we have defined here, which is the date, will be the date column. That's our criteria range. Our criteria now will be the date. I will close that. Control Enter, and we can see the total sales for the date that we have defined here as our criteria is 113. Let's count how many sales were for LOL surprise. Equals COUNTIFS. Our criteria range based on our criteria will be the product column. Put a comma to separate our argument. Our criteria will be the product LOL surprise. And I'll close that, Control Enter. We had 6 products sold based on the criteria that we specified here, which is LOL surprise. Let's see what were the total sales for this particular product. We'll do equals SUMIFS. We're adding the total sales. That's our sum range. Our criteria range based on our criteria that we have defined is the product. So we select the product column, put a comma to separate the argument. So now our criteria will be LOL surprise, as that's what we have defined we need to calculate the total sales for. We close that, Control Enter, and we can see the total sales for the particular product that we specified here is $1,052. So let's count how many sales were for the South region. We'll do equals COUNTIFS. Our criteria range based on our criteria will be the region, as this is South region. So we will select the region column, put a comma to separate the arguments, and then our criteria will be the one that we have defined there, which is South region. And we'll close that, Control Enter, and we can see that we have a count of 5. So let's see what are the total sales for the South region. We'll do equals SUMIFS. We're adding the total sales. That will be the sum range. Whatever we are adding will be our sum range. We put a comma. Now we need to provide the criteria range. And based on our criteria, which is the South region, that means our range also will be the region criteria. We select the region field. And you notice I am not selecting the entire column. Some students, I have noted what they do before when they are selecting a range. They will select the entire column like that. We will not do that in this class. In this class, we are only selecting the cells that we are using, or the values or the data that we are using in our calculation. So that's not correct, and that's not what we will do in this class. So I will select the region column. I'm only selecting the data that we are using for our calculation, not the entire column. That's our criteria range. Now let's select the criteria, which is South. Close our formula, Control Enter, and we can see the total sales for the South region based on our data right here is $1,002. And again, as I said, we are specifying a condition. That means we are only making calculations on some of the items and not all the items. And we can see here, we made calculations based on some of the items and not all the items. Up here on our example number 1, we made calculations based on all the items. But here we're using the COUNTIFS, the SUMIFS. It's based on some of the items from our data. Let's do example number 3, where we are calculating the average ifs based on the South region, the mean ifs based on this product, LOL surprise, and the max ifs based on the same product. So we'll do equals average ifs. I will use my down arrow to select that function. I will use the tab key to select it. I like using the tab key to select the functions. The average range will be the values that we are calculating the average for. And in our case, will be the revenue. Put a comma to separate the argument. Our criteria range is based on the criteria that we have defined. We have defined South, which is our region. Our criteria range will be the region column. We'll select that, put a comma, and now give the argument for the criteria. And we'll close that, Control Enter to remain in the same cell. And we can see our average sales for the South region is $203. And this is not formatted as a currency. So we'll come up here in our number formatting and we'll select currency, format that as currency. Now let's calculate our MINIFS. I mean cell H38. I will do equals MINIFS. And you can see the MINIFS return the minimum value among the cells specified by a given set of conditions or criteria. I will tab to select it, and then we will select the minimum range, which will be the revenue, and then the criteria range will be the product, because we have specified LLO surprise, which is a product, and then the criteria is the one that we have specified there. Now let's close that, Control Enter, and we can see the minimum sales for LOL Surprise is $72.67. We will format that as currency as well. Let's calculate now the max ifs for the same product, and we'll see what was their minimum sale for LOL Surprise and what was the maximum sale for LOL Surprise. I'll do equals max ifs using the down arrow. Max ifs returns the maximum value among sales specified by a given set of conditions or criteria, which is what we are calculating for our case. I will use the tab key to select that function. Our max range will be the revenue. Put a comma to separate the argument. Our criteria range, based on our criteria, which is the product, will be the product column. Put a comma to separate the argument. And now our criteria is right here, which is LOL Surprise. Close that, Control Enter. The maximum sale for LOL Surprise, which is the product that we have specified for our criteria, is $266.74. And I will format that as currency. On this worksheet, CSAM calculations worksheet, I've shown you some different examples on how to do the count A, sum, average, and also to do the COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, MINIFS, and MAXIFS. On our upcoming worksheets, we have examples of just COUNTIFS, where we'll do several examples on COUNTIFS. We'll do several examples on SUMIFS. We'll do several examples on AVERAGEIFS, and several examples on MINIFS and MAXIFS. I will click on the COUNTIFS worksheet, and we will start on the COUNTIFS worksheet to see the different examples that we have there. With COUNTIFS, we want to count the matches. And as I said, we are using the COUNTIFS to count our criteria or conditions, because with COUNTIFS, we can count with one or more condition. We have 3 examples on this worksheet that we will work on. On an example 4, we are counting how many products were sold. We will use the relative and absolute cell references and also the dynamic spill array formula. I'm in cell H13, and we'll start with the relative and absolute cell reference for this one. I will do equals COUNTIFS criteria range. So I'm counting how many products. That means my criteria range will be the products field. I will select on the product field. I'm in cell D12. And I can either use the mouse to select all the data in this field, or I can use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift down arrow. And because this is a little bit huge data compared to the other data that we used in the previous worksheet, I would suggest that you use Control Shift down arrow to select this. I'll press F4 to lock that, because we are selecting that entire range and we are using the relative and absolute cell references. So we need to lock that and make it absolute cell reference, so that when we copy to the other cells where we are counting our products, that range will be locked. And you noticed when I pressed F4, it took me back to the active cell from all the way down where I was on my data. I'll put a comma, and now my criteria will be the product that I have specified right there. And I can close that, Control Enter, and I will double click to copy my formula down once I see the angry rabbit right there. Come to the last cell, press F2 to verify my formula, and I can see my formula is having the correct cell references. And now let's go to count our products using the dynamic spill array formula. We'll do equals COUNTIFS, and again we're selecting the criteria range for the products. I'll click on the products field, Control Shift down arrow. We are not locking this one because we're using the dynamic spill array. I'll press Control backspace. That will take me back to the active cell, and I'll press a comma. And because this is a dynamic spill array, for my criteria, I will select all those products because I'm using all these products to calculate how many products were sold. I will close that and enter, and I can see my answers spilled to the neighboring cells. I'm counting all the products that were sold for each of these products. And again, we know with the dynamic spill array, our formula is only in the first cell, but what we see when we click on the last cell right here is the formula on the formula bar that is grayed out. Now let's do our second example on this worksheet, which is example number 5. On this example number 5, we are counting with more than one criteria. We'll still use the COUNTIFS because we are counting equals COUNTIFS, tab to select that. Our criteria range, we have two criteria here. We have the sales rep and we have the product. And it doesn't matter which one you begin with as long as you have both criteria in your formula. Our criteria range that we will select first will be the sales rep, and I will come here to my data and select the sales rep field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell. I'm not locking this one because I will not copy this formula in a different cell. I'll press comma, and now my criteria will be the sales rep. If your criteria range is the sales rep field, then your criteria has to be the sales rep as well. We'll put a comma to go to the next argument, and this is our second criteria or our second condition. Our second condition is the product. That means we are selecting the products field from our data. Click on cell D12, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, and put a comma, and now provide the cell reference for our criteria, which is the product. And now we can close our formula, enter. And now we see that the count of LOL surprise that was sold by Tiona is a count of 7. Now let's do our third example on this worksheet, which is example number 6. On this one, we have more than one criteria. We have 1, 2, 3 different conditions that we are counting with, and we will use the COUNTIFS. We'll do equals COUNTIFS. We have 3 different conditions. We have the sales rep, the region, and the product. And again, it does not matter which one you start with as long as your criteria range and your criteria matches. So we'll start with the region. That means I will select the region field, Control Shift down arrow. I'm using the relative and absolute cell reference. That means I will lock that. I will use the F4 key to lock that. I'll put a comma. My criteria will be the region. Put a comma. My second criteria will be the sales rep. That means the range will be the sales rep field. Click on cell C12. Control Shift down arrow to select that entire field. F4 to lock that. Put a comma. Select the criteria, which is the sales rep. Our third criteria is the product. That means we are selecting the product's range for our criteria range. I'm in cell D12, Control Shift down arrow to select that entire field. I'll press F4 to lock that, and then put a comma, and then select the criteria, which is the product. Now, I will close this formula, and I will enter. And I would like us to spot the error that I have done here because I have seen several students make this error. So I will close, enter, and I copy my formula, and then we will look at it together what error that I have done in this formula. Close that, Control Enter, and I will double click to send that down. I have all 0, which cannot be the case. Let's click on any of these one formulas. Press F2. And look at our formula. So the range is all locked. That is correct. The criteria, the cell reference is different. We can see right here, the cell reference is H33, but it should be H30. The criteria range for a second condition, that is correct. That is locked. The criteria, that is a wrong cell reference. It should be referring to Northwest right there, which is H31. That criteria range is correct, and the criteria is correct right there. So let's now edit our formula. I'll press Escape and go back to my first formula here where I will edit that. Press F2, and we can see our error is because we didn't lock H31 and we didn't lock H30. Because when we copy our formula down, we want these two cell references to remain locked into the sales rep and into the region. That means we have to come back to our formula. Under criteria, I will select the criteria right there and I can see the cell is highlighted. I'll press F4 to lock that. Come to the second criteria. My cell reference is selected. F4 to lock it. And now I can Control Enter. I've edited my formula. Now let's copy our formula down. And we can see now our formula is calculating correctly. If I press F2, I can see I locked the cell references there and the cell references for the ranges are locked. And I can see this is a relative cell reference because when I copy my formula, I would like this to move relatively down as I copy my formula. Press Escape. Now let's do the same calculation, but this time we're using the dynamic spill array formula. Equals COUNTIFS. The criteria range, as I said, you can start with any of the conditions or any of the criterias as long as the criteria range and the criteria match. This time I will start with the sales rep. Control Shift down arrow. I'm not locking this one. Control backspace to go back to the active cell. Put a comma. My criteria is the sales rep. Put a comma. My second criteria is the region. So criteria range for the region. Selecting on the region field, Control Shift down arrow to select that entire field, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, put a comma and provide the criteria, which is Northwest. Put a comma for that criteria range, which is the products. Control Shift down arrow to select that entire field, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, put a comma. And this time, because it's a dynamic spill array formula, we're selecting all the products there and close our formula and enter. And now we have done the same calculations, but we have used different formulas on this one. That's the way you will do your COUNTIFS if you have one condition or one criteria, or if you have more than one condition. You will still use COUNTIFS and do your formulas the way we have done it on these examples. Now let's go do the SUMIFS calculations. I'm clicking on the SUMIFS worksheet to open that. On this worksheet, we will learn how to use the SUMIFS to add with a condition, and we will use one or more conditions, but we'll still use the SUMIFS. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 examples on this worksheet, and we will work on all of them. And as I said, we will do this dynamic spill array formula, and we will do the relative and absolute cell reference as well. So whichever you're comfortable with using, you can go ahead and use that. On this example number 7, which is our first example on this worksheet, we are adding the sales from our data, how much sales were made on each of the products. That means we're using the SUMIFS to add. We'll do equals SUMIFS, tab to select that. The sum range is whatever values that we are adding our sales. I'm selecting the sales field, Control Shift down arrow to select the entire field, Control backspace to go back to the active cell. And this is a dynamic spill array formula. I'm not locking any of the cell references. I'll put a comma. My criteria range will be the products field because we are calculating how much sales were made for each of the products. Select the product field, Control Shift down arrow to select their entire field, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, and put a comma, and then provide my criteria. And because this is a dynamic spill array formula, I'm selecting all the cells or all the values that I will need in my formula. Close that and enter. So let's do the same calculation here. And this time we are using the relative and absolute cell references. That means we will lock our ranges. We'll do equals SUMIFS, tab to select that. The sum range will be the sales because we are adding the sales. Control Shift down arrow. This time we're using the absolute cell reference. Press F4 to lock that, and it takes you back to the active cell. Put a comma. Our criteria range will be the products field because we are calculating sales for the products. Select the product field, Control Shift down arrow to select all the cells that we are using in our formula. We're locking this one, it's an absolute cell reference. F4 to lock that, don't forget that, and put a comma. And now we provide our criteria, which is a relative cell reference, just one product right there. Close our formula, Control Enter to remain in the same cell, and then I will hover my mouse until I see the angry rabbit. Then I'll copy my formula down, come to the last cell, F2 to verify my cell references, and I can see my ranges are locked and my relative cell reference is the last product right there. Now let's calculate the total sales. We'll use our keyboard shortcut for sum, which is Alt equals. We have the correct range selected, and I will Control Enter and do the same thing for this other one. Alt equals Control Enter. I have calculated the sales for each of the products that were sold. I will select all this and we will do number formatting on this. We will do the currency. If you like using accounting, you can go ahead and use that. Come up here and select currency to format our numbers as currency. Let's do our second example on this worksheet, which is example number 8. On this example, we're calculating what was the total sales that each sales rep made. We will start with the dynamic scale array formula, and then we will use the relative and absolute cell references formula. We'll do equals SUMIFS, tab to select that. The sum range again is the values that we are adding. I'm selecting the sales field, Control Shift down arrow. This is a dynamic scale array formula. That means we are not locking it. Control backspace to go back to the active cell. Put a comma to separate the argument. Our criteria range for this example will be the sales rep because we are calculating what was the total sales for each sales rep. I'll select the sales rep field. And again, I'm not locking that on. We're using a dynamic scale array. And then we're selecting all the cells that we need in our formula here, which is all the sales rep right there. Close that and enter. Now let's do this other same calculation, but this time we're using the absolute cell reference and relative cell reference. Equals SUMIFS, whatever value that we are adding, which is the sales. Control Shift down arrow. We're locking this one. F4 to make it an absolute cell reference. Put a comma. Our criteria range will be the sales rep. Select the sales rep field. Control Shift down arrow. F4 to lock that and go back to the active cell. Put a comma. And our criteria will be a relative cell reference where we're selecting only one of the sales rep cell reference. I'll close that. Control Enter to remain in the same active cell. And then come to the right of the cell until I see the cross or the angry rabbit. And I'll copy my formula down. Come to the last cell, F2, to confirm my cell references are correct. And I can see the locked cell references or the absolute cell references are correct. And the relative cell reference is correct as well. Now let's do the total sales. Alt equals, Control Enter. And I'll do the same thing for the sales right there. Alt equals and enter. And I have done the calculations for that as well. Let's work on our third example on this worksheet, which is example number 9. On this example, we are adding the total sales for each sales rep in the specified region. On these two cells, we'll do a data validation for the sales rep and the region. But first, we need to get a unique list for the sales rep and region from our data. I will show you how to get the unique list, and we will use a formula. I'm in cell M35. That's where we will create our unique list. And I have already typed the sorted unique list. We need the region and we need the sales rep field. And I want our unique list sorted. If you don't want to sort your unique list, you can just do equals unique and then select the field where you would like your unique list to come from. So for our case, let's just select the region, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace, to go back to the active cell. Close that, and we can see we have the unique list and it is not sorted. If we would like to sort our unique list, press F2, just right after the equals before the unique function, you can type sort and tab and then go all the way to the end of your formula and close that, add another parenthesis, and now once you enter, you have sorted your unique list. Now we have our sorted unique list here. We'll do the same thing for the sales rep field. Equals, this time we'll start with sort, unique, tab to select that, and then select the sales rep field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace, go back to the active cell, close that. We're closing the first parenthesis for the unique function and the second parenthesis because we also have the sort function there, and enter. And now we have unique list for the region and we have the unique list for the sales rep. Now what we will do here, we'll do a data validation for the sales rep and region, which means the only data that we want in this cell is the sales rep, and we will provide that data and no other data can go into this cell. I'll show you how to do the data validation. On your ribbon, click on the data tab, and then on your data tools group, you see the data validation button. Click on that arrow and select data validation. Now, right now on this cell, we are allowing any value. We do not want to allow any value, but we only want to allow values from the list that we will provide, which is the unique list that we have created right here for our sales rep. We'll click on that arrow and we are allowing data from a list. And now we have to provide the source. So I will click on the source box right there. And now I am able to select my list. And you can see my list is locked on the cell references that I selected right there. And now I will click OK. Now you can see we have this arrow. That means we are only selecting the data from the list that we provided, which is our sales rep. And if we try to type something else there, so if I type something different there, I get an error because on this cell, we have restricted what values we want entered in this cell. Now we'll select from our list, which is right there, and we're selecting the second sales rep right there. We'll do the same thing with the region. We'll do a data validation for the region. Again, on my ribbon, I've selected the data tab, and on the data tools, I'm selecting the data validation button. Click on the arrow, select data validation, and again on this cell, I'm allowing any value, but I don't want that. I want to allow values from a list that I will provide. So I will change that to list. On the source box, I will click on that to make that active and then select the list, which is my region right there. And you can see this is locked as well. I will click OK. And now you can see on this cell too, we have an arrow and we are able to select from our list that we provided right there. Again, we cannot type anything else here because we are only specifying we need data from the list that we provided. Click on that arrow and I will select Northwest. And now let's calculate the total sales for the sales rep that we will select here in the region that we will specify there. So we'll do equals SUMIFS. The sum range is whatever values we are adding, which is our sales. Control Shift down arrow to select the entire field. Control backspace to go back to the active cell. I'm not locking this one. We are not copying our formula anywhere, so I will put a comma. The criteria range, let's start with the sales rep. So we'll select the sales rep field. Control Shift down arrow to select the entire field. Control backspace to go back to the active cell. Put a comma. And our criteria, our first criteria is the sales rep. I'll put a comma to go to the second criteria, which is our region. So we will select the region field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, put a comma, and provide our second criteria right there. And now we can close that and enter. Now we can see we are calculating, or we are adding our total sales based on two conditions. It has to be this sales rep and it has to be that region. If we would like to change the sales rep, we can change using our arrow there, and we can do miles. We can keep the region the same, and we can see this is how much the sales that miles made on this region. If we change the region, let's do south, and we can see the total sales that miles made on the south region. And because we have the data validation there, we provided a list. We can change to any of the sales rep from our list there, and we can change any of the region from our list right there. Now let's go to our last example in this worksheet, and that's example number 10. We'll calculate the total sales for each region. We'll do equals SUMIFS. We're using a dynamic spill array formula. Let's get the sum range, which is the total sales, which will be the sales field. Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell. And then our criteria range will be the region, because our criteria here is the region. Select the region field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, put a comma, and then provide the criteria, which is all these cell references right there. Close that and enter. And let's do the same calculation here, but we will use absolute and relative cell references. We do equals SUMIFS. The sum range is our total sales. Control Shift down arrow. We'll lock that to make it an absolute cell reference and go back to the active cell. Press a comma. The criteria range will be the region, because our criteria here is the region. Select the region field, Control Shift down arrow. We lock that to make it absolute cell reference and go back to the active cell. Put a comma. The criteria will be one cell reference here, which is the relative cell reference for the region. Close that. Control Enter to remain in the same cell. And then we can copy our formula down once we see the cross right there. Copy our formula down. And right here we will do the total sales. Alt equals for the sum function. And Alt equals on this other cell as well. That's the way we will do the SUMIFS, and we have seen different examples right here with one condition or with more than one condition. We also have seen how to do the data validation and how to create a unique list from our data. Let's go to the next worksheet, which is AVERAGEIFS. On this worksheet, we will only do two examples, example 11 and 12. And we are finding the average sales for each product and also the average sales for each sales rep. On this example, we'll not use the absolute and relative cell reference, but if that's what you like using most, you can go ahead and do that on this calculation. But I will use the dynamic spill formula on these examples right here. We'll do equals AVERAGEIFS. We'll use my down arrow to select the function. Tab when I get to AVERAGEIFS to select that. The average range will be the total sales because I want to find the average of the sales. I'll select the sales field, Control Shift down arrow, and this is a dynamic spill array formula. I'm not locking. Control backspace to go back to the active cell, put a comma. My criteria range based on the criteria that I have specified here will be the products field. I will select the products field, Control Shift down arrow, and then Control backspace to go back to the active cell, put a comma, and I'm selecting all my products here. This is a dynamic spill array formula. I will close that and enter. We have calculated that example right there, and we found the average of the sales for each of the product that was sold based on our data right there. Now let's do the average of sales for each sales rep. What was the average sales that each of the sales rep made? We'll do the dynamic spill array formula as well. I'm not doing the relative and absolute cell reference. As I said in my past videos, I like the dynamic spill array formulas better than absolute and relative cell references. I'll do equals average ifs, use my down arrow, and once I get to average ifs, I'll press tab to select that function. The average range is whatever value that I'm finding the average for, which in our case is our sales. So I'm selecting the sales field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, and I'll press comma to separate my argument. My criteria on this example is the sales rep, which means my criteria range will be the sales rep field. Select the sales rep field, Control Shift down arrow to get the whole field in that data. Control backspace to go back to the active cell. Put a comma to separate the argument, and now select all the cells or all the values that I am using in this formula, which is all the list of the sales rep that I have right there. I'll close that and enter. And I have calculated now the average sales for each of the sales rep, and I have used the dynamic spill array formula for this example. Again, if you prefer using the absolute and relative cell references, you are welcome to go ahead and use that. Let's go to our last worksheet on this video number 5, which is MINIFS and MAXIFS worksheet. We have two examples on this worksheet, example 13 and example 14. On these examples, we're calculating the MINIFS, that is finding the smallest number or the minimum sale for the day, and the MAXIFS, which is the biggest number, and in our calculation, it will be the highest sale for the day. I'm using the dynamic spill array formula for these two examples. In this class, we have learned how to use the dynamic spill array formula, and we have also learned how to use the absolute and relative cell references formula for our calculations. You're welcome to use any of these two formulas depending on what you're comfortable with. You're welcome to do that. I'm clicking on cell H12, and I will first calculate the MINIFS. Equals MINIFS, our minimum range, that will be the minimum sales. That will be our range. So I will select the sales field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, press the comma. Our criteria range, based on our criteria here, which is the date, our criteria range will be the date field. I'm selecting the date field, Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, press a comma, and then our criteria will be our date criteria right here. And since we're using the dynamic spill array formula, I will select all these cells. These are the values that I will need in my calculation, and I will press enter. And now we have our minimum sales for the day calculated right there. Let's now calculate the maximum sale for the day. What will be the maximum sale for each of these days? Equals MAXIFS. Our maximum range will be the sales field. Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, comma, and then our criteria range will be the date field. Control Shift down arrow, Control backspace to go back to the active cell, and then press the comma, and then our criteria will be the date. Again, I'm selecting these all values as I'm using all these values for my calculation. Control Shift down arrow, and then I will close that and enter. And I have calculated the minimum sale and the maximum sale for each of these days of the month. We have come to the end of this video where we have learned how to calculate with one or more criteria. We learned how to calculate using the IFS aggregate functions, COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, MINIFS and MAXIFS. We have also learned how to create a unique list from our dataset, as well as add data validation to selected cells. In our next video, we will continue learning the IFS Aggregate Function using the Excel table feature and define names for our cell references. Bye-bye for now, and I will see you in our next video. Thank you.